Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth and beauty in the world's great books. My name is Eric Rostad. I'm coming to you here from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 200 of the great books over the next 10 to 15 years. But today I have a special episode where I'm going to cover a more recent book, and that book is called The Bookshop by Evan Friss. Now, I am the business manager at Landmark Booksellers here in Franklin, Tennessee, and our owner, Joel Tomlin, he bought each of these the staff members this book, and we got together last night and we discussed it. And we talked about what we learned, what things maybe we could try at the bookstore, and it was a really good discussion, and it was just a fun book to read. If you are someone who loves bookstores, you'll really enjoy this book. And if you're someone who loves bookstores, you'll really love Landmark Booksellers. So we're like 25 minutes south of Nashville. So if you're ever in town for something in Nashville, you got to come stop by in Franklin, Tennessee. We call it a book lover's paradise, and it really is. It has that feel of a bookstore. We've got some leather couches in there. You just kind of want to sit down, enjoy your time in this bookstore. I've been to bookstores all over the place. I love whenever I travel, I go to bookstores, and Landmark is something special. So in this episode, what I want to do is just kind of talk a little bit about this book, and then I want to share 3 things that I learned in this book. After that, I'm going to highlight some of those favorite bookstores that I've been to in different cities. So first off, this book, what it does is it starts at the beginning and talks about kind of the history, and it focuses on the bookstores in the United States. So the tagline here is a history of the American bookstore. So we're not getting information about like London bookstores or bookstores in Europe or Asia or somewhere else, but this is focused on the United States, and it kind of starts with Benjamin Franklin. And unbeknownst to me, he had started a bookstore himself, and so we learn about Benjamin Franklin. We learn about what worked for him, what didn't, and then the author just kind of goes through the history of bookstores in the United States. And it's a really interesting and fascinating history. And so there's all types of bookstores that are covered in this book, and then just across time. And it ends up with information about Amazon. And Amazon's even trying to start their own bricks and mortar, their own bookstores after having been online only. So a lot of neat information, a lot of things to ponder and think about, and then just also stuff that really just kind of makes you long for going to a bookstore, and just kind of gets you kind of like start smelling bookstores and thinking about them and getting nostalgic and all that. So fun book if you are a book lover. So the things that really stuck out to me in this book were 3 main things. And the first is just the discussion about organization, how a bookstore organizes itself. So I want to read one quote here and then talk about that a little bit. How bookstores were organized changed how people thought about books, the way they related to one another, and which books customers discovered. End quote. Now that is something I see quite a bit at Landmark, and it's been such a fun job to have this being the business manager. And my role is to set kind of the direction for the bookstore. I do bookkeeping, I do all the online and technology things, and I've been getting involved too, just in like, how are we laying out this store? And one thing we did this year was we introduced the Great Wall. So we have this wall now of the greatest books ever written. And I think there's probably about 100 to 150 books there. But the other thing we did is we placed them in chronological order. And that has been so cool, just because you can kind of see how the ideas have progressed through time. And you see in the top left corner how these ideas originated in Mesopotamia or in Greece with Homer, and then how the tragedy writers took the ideas from Homer and kind of expanded on them. And then you get into Plato and Aristotle, and they're looking at these ideas from more of a philosophical mindset. But then you get all the way to Nietzsche, and he's writing a book about tragedies, and he's talking about the tragedies that were written in ancient Greece. And so they call the great books the great conversation, because they're speaking to one another. And just seeing them laid out like that has been neat, but it's been even neater to hear the comments from people and just to hear what they're saying of, how it just allows you to kind of view things in that way. So I've seen firsthand how important organization is in a bookstore. And so anytime you go into a bookstore, you're going to have kind of the general categories, and they might be history or biography, children's, young adults. You've just got these different sections of the bookstore, but it tells you a lot how a bookstore organizes their books. And from that quote, just it impacts the person coming in too, the book lover who comes into the store, or the novice who's looking for something to read. The organization is kind of the first step in where that person is directed for the book that they may not even know that they're looking for. So I loved reading about that and just kind of thinking of that overall of what's the best way to organize. Some of the stores covered in this book would organize by publisher. So they would just have a section for Penguin, a section for some of the other publishers, others by topic. Others did have, one bookstore had a wall back, like where, kind of like that idea of the Great Wall. So it's just neat to see how the different bookstores did that, and then how that impacted people. So I'm always curious about that. Whenever I go into a bookstore, that's something that I look at. I look at the things they call it. We even implemented some of those at Landmark, where I saw this smart thinking section in London, and just liked that idea for kind of aspirational nonfiction works. And so, yeah, always a delight to see the organization side of things. The next thing that really stuck out is just how there is nothing new in the book business. And we like to think there is, and when booksellers get together, they're always talking about how hard it is right now, and we've got, the competition with Amazon and inflation, and just things are tough, and they are. It's a tough year for retailers in general, but 2024 is a hard year for booksellers as well. And it's been a tough decade, and it's been a tough century. And so the further back you go, which is a benefit of reading a book like this, where you see kind of from the beginning of history in the United States and history of the bookstores, just that it's been hard. There's always something. There's always a competitor. There's always they were talking about people that would sell books on the street, and they would just set up right outside of a bookstore, and these bookstores couldn't really do anything about it. So customers were getting stopped before even getting into the store by people who were selling books but weren't even a part of that store, and so they were taking customers away, and that would be a really hard thing to overcome. And so there's always challenges, and yes, the online side of things is a bigger challenge now. We even see in Landmark where people will come in and they're snapping photos, and they're just going home and they're going to buy those from Amazon or somewhere else. And I've done that too. I think just it's important to know that this is nothing new. Maybe the way it is now, the way of competition with Amazon is something new, but there's always been something that has made it hard for booksellers. So I think in a way that just kind of frees you to just pursue the things you're good at. And that's really where bookstores need to step up and offer some sort of a value that can only happen in the store. So if people are coming in and they're taking photos of the book and then just ordering them from Amazon, we have not offered them enough value. So perhaps the value is in guiding them to the right book. And that is something very valuable, because I know for myself, and my wife will sit down to Netflix, say, and we're going to watch a movie at night. And we end up not watching a movie because we're just sitting there scrolling and trying to find the right movie. And then we get so tired that we don't end up watching the movie. Same thing happens in bookstores. People walk in, it's overwhelming. There's so many books. Where do you start? And so a thing of value that a bookstore can do is to curate and present the book that might change that person's life, or might be something that, based on what they've read previously, might be a good fit. And not just an algorithmic good fit of something you get from Amazon of, if you might like this type thing, but really at a different level, and just kind of getting a feel for the person, what they like, what they've read before, and maybe even directing them in a new direction. The other thing bookstores really allow, and this kind of ties into that first thing too with organization, is the ability to have serendipity or to explore. So I always say if you're not into reading, the best place to go is a bookstore, because you'll naturally gravitate to certain areas, and you may go right to the science fiction area, and you're really interested in that. That's an area that you should pick a book from. But bookstores are just great like that. Libraries as well, where you can just go in and kind of find what you're interested in and what you like. So that was helpful. That second thing there, there's nothing new in the book industry. We may even have more competition in the future, just even with the options people have for entertainment. The fact that people are not reading as much, things could get even tougher. And so we as booksellers need to just keep figuring out ways to add value to the book buying experience and guiding people to the right books. Third thing that really stuck out in this book is just this idea of how other bookstores have failed and kind of learning from that, but specifically how Amazon failed. And so this book has a chapter about Amazon. And so you see how they started. One thing I thought was super fascinating was just that Jeff Bezos was a reader as a kid. And you see this with a lot of the tech giants, is that they were just avid readers as a kid. They had this insatiable desire to learn and to read, and they got so much out of books, and it just guided their life. And kind of ironic with Jeff Bezos, and just that he's credited with having destroyed so many independent booksellers across the nation, and here he's a book lover. So he just kind of had this idea after a while of, well, maybe we can start a bookstore. And they did a lot of research, and they even had like book lovers be involved with the creation of these bookstores. And so they had them in different spots in the U.S. They didn't ever have a whole lot, but they did have one here in Nashville, and I remember visiting it. And the comment from the book is something I felt as well. And the word he uses is soulless. And so the author went into one, I think it was in Washington, D.C., this Amazon physical bookstore. And they had books, but they had other things as well. But the books were laid out, and there was only one person in there working. And they were just kind of sitting behind the desk. There was no, hey, what are you interested in reading? What have you read before? It was just kind of, they had signs all over the place. And it was the most algorithmically perfect bookstore in the sense of the categories, the organization of the store. It was all based on what they had learned, what Amazon had learned online. So it was kind of if you like this, you'll like this. And so they would pair books together like that. They would have books you can read in under a day based on time that people are on their Kindle and getting through a book, or most liked booked, or most reviewed, or best reviewed. And they just had these different sections, which were impossible for other bookstores, just with the amount of data that Amazon had. And yet, with all that data, and kind of this idea of, you've got a relatively small store, here are the best books, here are the ones you're most likely to enjoy. And it was soulless. And the reason it was soulless is they just had one person, and that one person usually was not a book lover. So something that sets a bookstore apart is just that aspect of having people work there who love books. And that's something we try to do at Landmark, and you can just tell. Everyone we hire has a unique interest in books, and they can guide people to an area that perhaps I can't in the store, or I don't know as much about. So we learn from each other, and then we're each kind of able to help people and guide people in their reading in different ways. So I found that very interesting, just looking at these Amazon stores. They all closed in 2022. So it was a few year experiment. It didn't work. Apparently it was not profitable, and so they closed them all down. And so you still have these independent bookstores. They outlasted the Amazon bookstores. Amazon, yes, still has the online presence, and they're still killing it there. But I just found that very interesting. And things that we can learn a lot from in that case. So the last thing here is I just want to close out with some of my personal favorites of bookstores. And so when I was growing up and especially in college, that's really when I started getting into bookstores. And one that I remember specifically was in Athens, Georgia, where I went to the University of Georgia. And it was Jackson Street Books. And obviously by the name, you could tell that it was on Jackson Street, which was right in the downtown area that was adjacent to the entrance to the university, to the original North Campus, the oldest part of the university. And that place just had these tall stacks of books, tall bookshelves, and it was just, I loved it so much. Some of the books you see behind me here were purchased there. I would always write where I bought books if I bought them at an independent bookstore. And so some of these books here just have, Jackson Street Bookstore written in them. And unfortunately, it went under. I don't know the exact year that it went under, but the last few times I've been in Athens, it is no longer there, and that made me very sad. But it was a very special place to me during college. I also went to Barnes & Noble a lot, and I know that's a chain. It kind of goes through a curve in this book where at first it's deemed the devil for having these huge stores and putting a lot of independent bookstores out of business. But now Barnes & Noble is kind of in cahoots with independent bookstores in the sense of they have a common enemy in Amazon. And then also the person that is in charge of Barnes & Noble, he's really seeking to give individual Barnes & Noble stores more leeway, to almost have them become local bookstores in a way. And so in just after college, there was a Barnes & Noble that was close to where I lived in Atlanta, and I would go there. It was 2 levels. It was enormous, and I just loved going to the different sections and that sort of thing. So in the U.S., just whenever I travel, I try to go to different bookstores. I remember some in Jacksonville, Florida. I love going into these independent bookstores. I love the smell. I love picking up old books and smelling them. I love seeing what is there. It just, the different sections, you learn things that are out there that you didn't know were even there. You see information, you see topics, you see novels, you see just, oh man, I just love it. I love going to bookstores. And so those were a couple of my favorites in the States. Traveling abroad, I studied at Oxford between my sophomore and junior year of college at Oxford University in England. And of course, there were some incredible bookstores there. Blackwell's is kind of the main one, but they did have some more independent bookstores there as well. So that's really where I loved going into those bookstores. I loved going into the different libraries at Oxford, and just kind of fell deeper in love with books. I probably had a whole suitcase full of books when I returned from studying abroad in Oxford. So again, a lot of the books on the shelves here are ones that I purchased in Oxford. And then my wife is a singer-songwriter, and so we travel with her music to the UK quite often. And there are a number of bookstores in Edinburgh that are just fantastic. And so Armchair Books, Edinburgh Books, I just went to Toppings and Company this past one, and then checked out a few other bookstores as well. And then just traveling around Scotland, there are quite a few just fantastic bookstores. And so I love going to these, love checking them out. And now as someone who is a business manager at a bookstore, I just love seeing how different stores do it and what they focus on. And I'm always trying to learn from them as well. So if you are a book lover, if you're a bookstore lover, please pick up this book. There's a lot that you will love. It will make you nostalgic. You'll want to just stop reading it and go get in your car and find the nearest bookstore. One thing we were talked about in the meeting with Landmark staff last night is just how do we move forward from here, and how do we get people to buy books at independent bookstores again? And there's almost this tendency of like, oh, we just gotta have them buy all the books and from independent bookstores. And that's even something that a comment that's made in this book. And I don't agree with that. One other comment in this book is just that people are promiscuous in their book buying these days, in the sense that they'll get a book from Amazon and they'll be shopping at a bookstore, and maybe they're at the airport and they'll get another one, and then they're just buying books from all over the place if they're buying their books. So, good reminder, just be something of value as a bookstore, that people can walk in and you've given them something that they can't get from Amazon. You're giving them something that they can't just get on their own of buying books from somewhere else, but you're providing some sort of a value, whether that's putting the right book in their hands or helping them kind of explore new areas. So I hope you pick up this book. I hope it causes you to go and search out some other bookstores. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter. Also, I have a Substack, which is where this podcast originates now, and you can give there. You can donate if you get value out of this episode. I'd love if you return that value in the form of $5 a month, $99 per year, or $500 per year. That just helps me cover the costs for this podcast, for this project. I just spent $100 today on books by Euripides, because I'm now on the Greek tragedy writer Euripides, and he has 17 plays that survived. He wrote 92, 17 survived. And I looked through my Euripides books and I realized I only had like 7 or 8 of them. And so I had to buy a bunch of other books to get all 17 of those. These plays are short enough to where you can get through them in a couple hours. I will also try to read them twice just because they're so good. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to do all 17 of them. And so I spent $100 more to get the other books. But those are just some of the costs with the project. If you get value, I'd love if you returned that value. Thank you for listening. I will see you next week. Keep reading, keep listening, and keep thinking. I'm out.